The Callahan family looked like the perfect picture of success and happiness. Their house stood at the end of a quiet suburban street, painted a crisp white with neatly trimmed hedges and a front porch that always seemed to invite admiration. Neighbors often commented on how organized and welcoming the family appeared, with Mr. Callahan's polished career as a respected attorney and Mrs. Callahan's reputation as a devoted mother who volunteered at school events. Their teenage daughter, Emily, seemed to embody innocence and achievement, excelling in academics and sports. To anyone on the outside, they were a model family that others envied, a symbol of stability in a world that often felt uncertain. Yet the truth inside their home was very different, though no one could see it through the flawless facade. Mrs. Callahan had once been known for her vibrant presence. She laughed easily, dressed with care, and carried herself with the energy of someone deeply content. Over the years, however, her spirit seemed to fade. Friends who had grown close to her began noticing subtle changes. She declined invitations more often, stopped updating her once active social media accounts with cheerful family pictures, and instead posted cryptic phrases about endurance, resilience, and strength. These small shifts were brushed aside by most as signs of stress or the natural strain of balancing life, but for those who paid attention, the cheerful spark was gone. Mr. Callahan, on the other hand, became more controlling in subtle ways that went unnoticed by most outsiders. He rarely allowed his wife to attend gatherings without him and was known to speak for her in conversations, steering discussions to his own achievements. He carried himself with the confidence of a man who demanded respect, but beneath that charm was an edge that only his family truly experienced. Emily, though quiet, sometimes displayed nervous habits, biting her nails, avoiding eye contact, and shrinking back when her father's voice grew stern. None of these small details seemed alarming on their own, yet together they painted a picture that no one dared to put into words. Rumors in the neighborhood began circulating after Mrs. Callahan skipped several charity meetings she had once organized passionately. A friend recalled receiving a text from her late at night, a single sentence that read, "Sometimes silence is the loudest cry." The friend brushed it off as exhaustion, unaware of the depth behind the words. To the neighbors, the Callahans remained the admirable family with the picture-perfect home. To those looking more closely, the cracks were starting to show. Still, no one could imagine the storm that was brewing inside the Callahan residence. The family dinners that looked so pleasant from the outside often ended in icy silence. The smiles in their holiday photos masked sleepless nights and whispered arguments behind closed doors. Even the carefully maintained lawn and polished cars in the driveway became symbols of the family's need to project normalcy while hiding the fractures within. The Callahans had mastered the art of appearances, and it was that illusion of perfection that made what happened next so unthinkable. It was a cool autumn evening when everything inside the Callahan household changed. The street outside was calm, with only the occasional rustle of leaves carried by the wind. Neighbors later recalled hearing nothing unusual that night, no shouting, no sounds that hinted at violence. Yet inside the home, events were unfolding that would leave a permanent scar on everyone connected to the family. At precisely 10:42 p.m., a chilling 911 call was placed from the Callahan residence. The dispatcher heard heavy breathing, a few muffled sounds of struggle, and then silence. The call cut off suddenly, leaving behind nothing but uncertainty. Within minutes, officers were dispatched to the home. When police arrived, the scene immediately felt wrong. The front door was slightly ajar, swinging gently as though it had been left open in haste. The lights inside were dim, casting long shadows across the hallway. The air was heavy, the silence almost oppressive, as if the house itself was holding its breath. As officers moved upstairs, they found Mr. Callahan lying on the floor of the master bedroom. Blood matted his hair, and he appeared unconscious but alive. The injury looked brutal, but it was the absence of his wife that shocked everyone the most. There was no sign of Mrs. Callahan anywhere in the house. The only trace she left behind was a thin streak of blood on the carpet, leading toward the back of the home and fading near the sliding glass doors. Detectives later described the sight as both haunting and confusing. The trail seemed deliberate, as though someone had been dragged, but there were no footprints, no signs of forced entry, and no clear indication of where she had gone. The patio door was unlocked, opening to the dark yard beyond. Searchlights swept across the grass, but nothing appeared disturbed. For investigators, it felt as though she had vanished into thin air. Meanwhile, their teenage daughter Emily was missing. A frantic search began around the neighborhood, and within an hour she was discovered in a neighbor's garage. She was crouched in a corner, her body trembling, her clothes damp with sweat. Although physically unharmed, she was unable to speak, her wide eyes filled with terror. Officers tried gently to question her, but she offered no words, only silent tears. The discovery of Emily deepened the mystery. Why had she run? What had she seen that left her unable to explain? Forensics teams combed through the Callahan home until the early hours of the morning. They found signs of a struggle in the bedroom, overturned furniture, shattered glass, and drops of blood on the bedspread. Yet nothing was stolen. Expensive jewelry and electronics were untouched, making robbery an unlikely motive. The case quickly shifted from a potential home invasion to something far more personal. Theories began to take shape. Some believed Mr. Callahan had been attacked by an intruder who also kidnapped his wife. Others suspected something darker, that the crime was rooted in the family's hidden conflicts. As dawn broke, news crews gathered outside the Callahan home, eager to capture the shocking story. A once perfect family was now at the center of a mystery no one could explain. A man injured, a woman missing, a daughter traumatized, and a trail of blood that led nowhere. The night of silence had set the stage for a case that would consume the community and eventually the entire nation. As investigators dug into the Callahan family's past, a disturbing web of secrets began to unravel. What had initially appeared to be a straightforward case of a missing woman and an injured husband quickly transformed into something far more complicated. Financial records revealed that Mr. Callahan had been quietly transferring large sums of money into hidden accounts over the course of several years. The transactions were carefully disguised through his law firm, but forensic accountants traced the movement of funds and uncovered patterns consistent with embezzlement. His colleagues, when questioned, admitted there had been whispers of irregularities, but no one dared confront him directly. To the public, he was still the successful attorney with a flawless reputation, but behind the curtain, his professional life was beginning to collapse. Alongside the financial revelations, old documents resurfaced that painted a chilling picture of life inside the Callahan home. Years earlier, Mrs. Callahan had filed complaints with local authorities, reporting instances of abuse. The records included photographs of bruises and written statements describing emotional torment. Yet, each time, the cases were quietly dismissed. Friends remembered how she would occasionally hint at unhappiness, but she always stopped short of saying too much. The complaints seemed to vanish without consequence, leaving her trapped in a cycle no one outside the family truly understood. These reports now became crucial pieces of the puzzle, suggesting that the night of her disappearance may have been connected to years of silent suffering. Forensic teams continued their work, focusing on the thin trail of blood that had been discovered leading toward the backyard. Tests confirmed it belonged to Mrs. Callahan, a revelation that sent shockwaves through the community. If she had been injured badly enough to leave that much blood behind, how had she managed to vanish so completely? Dogs were brought in to track her scent, but they lost the trail within yards of the house. There were no tire marks, no footprints, nothing that explained how she had disappeared. The mystery deepened with each unanswered question. Attention then turned toward Emily, the daughter who had been found hiding in the neighbor's garage. Though she still refused to speak, her actions raised suspicions. Investigators wondered whether she had witnessed something too terrible to repeat. Psychologists who observed her behavior suggested she might be protecting herself from trauma, her silence serving as a shield against memories too painful to face. Detectives believed her testimony could unlock the truth, but without her words, the case remained stuck in a fog of uncertainty. Meanwhile, the media latched onto the story, turning it into a national obsession. Headlines described the Callahans as the family that looked perfect but was now crumbling under dark revelations. Talk shows speculated about motives, with some commentators insisting that Mr. Callahan had staged the attack on himself to deflect suspicion, while others suggested that Mrs. Callahan had orchestrated her own disappearance to escape a life of control and fear. Public opinion was fiercely divided, but one thing was certain: the case was no longer a private tragedy. It had become a spectacle, a story of betrayal and hidden darkness that captivated the nation. The trial that followed was unlike anything the quiet community had ever seen. From the moment jury selection began, the courtroom was filled with reporters, sketch artists, and curious spectators who lined up outside for a chance to witness the proceedings. The Callahan case had transformed into a media storm, labeled the trial of the century by headlines across the country. Every detail was scrutinized, from the way Mr. Callahan adjusted his tie at the defense table to the way Emily avoided eye contact when she entered the room. The tension inside the courthouse was suffocating, with both sides presenting narratives so convincing that even seasoned observers struggled to decide where the truth lay. The prosecution built their argument around the evidence found in the home and the disturbing history of the Callahan marriage. They claimed Mr. Callahan had staged his own injuries to appear as a victim, using the blood trail and chaos in the bedroom to mislead investigators. Their theory was that he murdered his wife in a moment of rage, attempted to cover it up, and then struck himself to divert suspicion. Financial records, testimonies from former colleagues, and Mrs. Callahan's old abuse reports were introduced as proof of motive. The prosecutors painted him as a man with both personal and professional crises closing in on him, desperate enough to eliminate the one person who might expose his secrets. The defense, however, countered with a narrative that shocked many. They suggested Mrs. Callahan had vanished by choice, taking advantage of the chaos in the house to disappear. According to them, she had endured years of turmoil and finally reached her breaking point. They argued she staged her own disappearance to escape her husband and perhaps to punish him by leaving behind incriminating circumstances. The defense emphasized the absence of a body, reminding the jury that no physical proof of her death existed. Without a body, they argued, the possibility of her being alive and in hiding could not be ignored. Emily's role in the trial became the centerpiece of speculation. For weeks, she remained silent, offering no testimony. Then, in a dramatic turn, the prosecution presented a written statement from her, obtained through a psychologist who had worked with her after the incident. In it, Emily described hearing violent shouting on the night of the disappearance. She recalled the sound of something heavy being dragged down the stairs and her father breathing heavily afterward. Though vague, her words carried emotional weight, casting suspicion directly on her father. The courtroom was stunned, and the defense scrambled to discredit her testimony, calling it the confused recollection of a traumatized teenager. Day after day, witnesses took the stand. Some neighbors testified about strange noises they had heard in the past, while others insisted the family always seemed normal. Experts debated over the blood evidence, the possibility of staged injuries, and the plausibility of disappearance without outside help. Each revelation added more uncertainty, not clarity. The jury was left torn between two compelling but incomplete stories, one of a husband-turned-killer, the other of a wife determined to vanish from a life she could no longer bear. As closing arguments were delivered, the courtroom was silent, every person inside aware of the gravity of the moment. The prosecution begged the jury to see through the lies and convict a man they claimed had built his life on deception. The defense pleaded for doubt, reminding everyone that no one had yet proven Mrs. Callahan was truly dead. When the jury finally withdrew to deliberate, the weight of the entire nation seemed to hang over 12 ordinary people who now carried the burden of deciding truth from illusion. The verdict was delivered in a courtroom packed beyond capacity. The jury filed in with solemn faces, their expressions giving away nothing. Reporters leaned forward, pens poised, while television cameras outside the courthouse broadcasted every moment to a waiting nation. When the foreman stood and announced that Mr. Callahan was guilty of second-degree murder, gasps rippled through the room. Some wept quietly, others nodded as though justice had been served. Mr. Callahan sat motionless, his face drained of color, as though the weight of the decision had crushed the last of his resolve. Emily stared down at her hands, unable to look at her father as the sentence was read, life in prison. The case seemed closed. For months afterward, the community attempted to move on, though the shadows of the trial lingered. Documentaries dissected every piece of evidence, authors rushed to publish books about the so-called perfect family gone wrong, and true crime enthusiasts debated endlessly about the verdict. To the public, Mr. Callahan was now a convicted murderer, a man who had destroyed his family in the most horrifying way. Yet beneath the surface, unanswered questions continued to gnaw at those who had followed the trial closely. The missing body of Mrs. Callahan was a loose end that no conviction could erase. 2 years later, the story took a turn no one could have predicted. A pair of hikers exploring a remote stretch of woodland stumbled upon a dilapidated cabin half buried in overgrowth. Inside, the space was sparse but eerily personal. Old clothes, notebooks, and household items were scattered across the room. A dusty journal lay on a table, its pages filled with entries written in a familiar hand. When authorities were called to the scene, the items were quickly confirmed as belonging to Mrs. Callahan. DNA testing proved without doubt that she had been living there in secret for some time. Her remains, found in a shallow grave near the cabin, revealed no signs of foul play. The cause of death was determined to be natural, likely an illness that had gone untreated. The discovery sent shockwaves across the country. The woman believed to have been murdered had in fact survived the night she disappeared and fled to a life of isolation. The revelation meant that a man had been convicted of killing someone who was still alive at the time of his trial. Public outrage grew, with calls to overturn the conviction and examine the failures of the justice system. Yet the damage was already done. Mr. Callahan had spent years behind bars, branded a monster, while the truth lay hidden in a forest no one thought to search. Emily, now older, faced her own torment. The realization that her testimony had helped convict her father left her in a spiral of guilt. Her memories of that night, once thought to be clear, were now clouded by doubt. Had she misheard? Had fear twisted what she believed she saw? The nation debated endlessly, some insisting that Mr. Callahan's imprisonment was still justified because of his history of abuse, others arguing that he was the victim of a tragic chain of assumptions. The Callahan trial became more than just a story of a missing woman and a fractured family. It stood as a haunting reminder of how secrets, appearances, and rushed conclusions can intertwine to destroy lives. Behind closed doors, the truth had been hidden for years, and when it finally surfaced, it revealed not closure but another layer of tragedy. In the end, no one emerged unscathed. A family was broken, a man's life was stolen by a false conviction, and a woman's desperate escape ended in lonely silence. The case remained etched into history, a symbol of how easily the line between guilt and innocence can blur when the truth chooses to hide.